Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Brian Howard, and I'm a Legislative Associate with the National Congress of American Indians, and I will also be your webinar administrator today. On behalf of NCAI and the Universal Service Administrative Company, I'd like to thank you for attending this presentation to provide an overview of the Universal Service Fund's E-rate program. Before we begin the presentation, I'd like to go over some of our webinar features. First, you should see on your screen the PowerPoint for today's presentation. If during the presentation you experience any lag in slide transition, it may be a result of internet connection, so just give it a few extra seconds to update on your screen. Currently, with the exception of panelists, all audience phone lines are muted until conclusion of the presentation. But if you would like to ask a question at any moment during the presentation, you can type it in the questions box on your webinar control panel. After the presentation, we have a Q&A session, and panelists will answer questions submitted through the questions box. If you would like to ask a question over your phone line, please use the raise the hand option so we can unmute your phone line after the presentation. And please also make sure that you have entered your audio PIN granting you audio capabilities for this webinar. Also, our webinar software archives all questions submitted through the questions box, so if we are unable to answer or address your question today, we will follow up with you after the webinar has concluded. And finally, this webinar is being recorded so that we can share this presentation with you and others not able to attend here today. And we will also have this uploaded on NCAI's website and YouTube channel to share broadly. Now that we've covered some of the webinar features, I'd like to introduce Ms. Mackenzie Howard, Program Analyst for the Schools and Libraries Program at the Universal Service Administrative Company.
Thank you, Brian, for the introduction. As Brian said, I'm a program analyst for the E-rate program, otherwise known as the Schools and Libraries Program. Both names are kind of interchangeable for us. And I'm going to give you just a brief overview of what USAC is. USAC is the Universal Service Administrative Company. And then I'll follow later with just a little more information specifically about the E-rate program. So USAC, as you see there, our mission is to protect the integrity of universal service, and we do that through educating our audiences and collecting and distributing contributions to the program, and then promoting program compliance. And so I know that's all kind of very high level in general, but just to give you an idea of our history, USAC was created in 1997 as a not-for-profit company, and we have divisions that I'll talk about later that support universal service, and the universal service we're talking about specifically is connection. So we want to promote connectivity to everyone in the United States, and that also includes territories of the United States like Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Mariana Islands. We have a finance division, which is responsible for billing and collection and disbursements of funds. But in general, everything is to promote the fact that all Americans deserve accessible, affordable internet and telephone service. And telephone service is becoming slightly in the background, a little bit more in favor of kind of putting high-speed connectivity and internet access in the foreground going forward. And so just the way that we operate, we have committees, we have a board of directors, and each committee oversees our budgets, and we have divisions such as Schools and Libraries Division, Rural Healthcare Division, the High Cost and Low Income Division, and each of those divisions is overseen by a board. So that just gives you kind of an idea of our organization. You can go on, Brian, to the next slide. Okay, so just to give you an idea, USAC was established by the Federal Communications Commission, and that's the FCC. So what happened was in 1996, the Telecommunications Act was written by Congress. And within the Telecommunications Act, the outlines and the statutes of the E-rate program and the other programs were designed. And then the program and the whole fund itself was handed off to the FCC. And so the FCC oversees the program from that point to today. And the FCC established USAC to do the administrating of this fund and the day-to-day kind of processes, procedures, and actually doling out money and looking at the applications and developing processes and procedures for that. And so, so first it was Congress, and then it was the FCC, and then it was USAC. So that's kind of how the hierarchy works, so to speak. USAC answers to the FCC, and the FCC answers to Congress. The whole fund is $10 billion a year, and it sounds like a lot, but it is spread out over the 4 programs that I mentioned. But we, as a company, are responsible for the entire fund. And so we distribute the funds through the 4 programs, and these programs were designed in that Telecommunications Act of 1996, of where the needs for broadband and the needs for connectivity are the most critical. Next slide. Okay, so these are the 4 programs that we serve. There's the Lifeline program, and the Lifeline program provides support to low-income communities on discounts on cell phone services, and now actually as a new portion of the Lifeline Reform Order is discounts on internet access. The High Cost program provides reduced rates on telecom and broadband, which can at times tend to have more expensive rates, and so our program helps to offset some of those costs. The Schools and Libraries program, which is us, and we provide telecom and broadband services to eligible schools and libraries. And then the Rural Health Care program provides the same type of support, both telecom and broadband services, but this time for rural health care providers. And so the Schools and Libraries program assists most schools and libraries, and we do that by helping them to obtain affordable internet access through discounts. We have different service types that are funded, and I'll talk about those more later, but data transmission services, internet access, voice services, internal connections, managed internal broadband services, and basic maintenance of internal connections. And we support connectivity, which is generally conduit or pipeline for communications. We do that using telecommunications services or the internet, so those categories of service. And then the school or library is responsible for providing any additional resources, such as what we call end user equipment. Those would be things like the computers themselves, the monitors, laptops, telephones, and the like. And then software, professional development, any other elements that would be necessary to help realize the objectives of the connectivity, which is, increased access to education and educational tools. Brian, you can go on to the next slide. And so the Schools and Libraries, again, E-rate program, operates on what we call a funding year. And the funding year will run through July 1st of a calendar year through June 30th of the next calendar year. And so the current calendar year is funding year the current funding year is funding year 2016. So whichever part of the year in which the funding year starts is what we name the funding year. So it will start July 1st, 2016, and that is funding year 2016. So even though funding year 2016 will extend a full 6 months into the next calendar year, we continue to refer to it as funding year 2016 until July 1st of the next year. So up until June 30th of 2016, we were actually still in funding year 2015. And now that we're in funding year 2016, we will be in it until July 1st of next year, where we will switch over to funding year 2017. And so the numbers that you see here, this data is a few months old, but the total applications funded, for instance, in 2014 was 36,625. And you can see the breakdown of the different types of applications. So we have schools that apply as individual schools, independent schools. We have school districts that apply. We have libraries that apply. We also have some library systems that will apply, and it's kind of like a school district, but for a library. We have consortia that apply, and a consortium is any group of entities that just decides that they want to band together and kind of share resources on the application process. There has to be somebody who's willing to fill out the forms. And so a lot of schools and libraries will find that it's easier for them to kind of help each other out with the form filing by, electing one person to do it for a group of schools and libraries. And then we also have statewide consortium, and that would be, basically a really large consortium that encompasses an entire statewide network of schools or libraries or schools and libraries. So the total authorized support in 2014 was $2.3 billion. Now, that was before the modernization order came out, and with the modernization order, our annual cap went from $2.25 billion actually to $3.9 billion. And so now we have a lot more to be able to give to people who apply annually. That's our annual budget. So the way that you take advantage of the funding is by getting a discount on your services. So you already have, or you may already plan to have, a monthly internet access bill, for example. That internet access bill, let's say, for simple math's sake, is $100 per month. Now, if you were participating in the E-rate program, you could potentially get up to 90% of a discount on those eligible services. Now, if you're asking for a combination of, let's say you're buying new computers, computers aren't eligible. But if you are buying new computers and buying internet access to use those computers to access the internet, then the internet access portion would be eligible. And so you would be able to kind of cost allocate parts of your bill that are eligible and ask for funding on those things. Or if you have a bill where everything is eligible, then you would ask for discounts on the entire bill. And just to review again, the types of services we're funding are telecommunications, internet access, broadband connections. We break them down into two categories, Category 1 and Category 2. Category 1, imagine this as the connectivity that gets internet or phone services up to your building. So for those of you who may be more technology savvy, this is your wide area network services. And so this would be things like basic internet access, if you were to get a fiber connection up to your building, or phone service up to your building. And then Category 2 services, think of this as the type of connectivity that's going on within your building. And so this is more like local area network services. The local area network services are going to be things like buying routers or access points, or the type of equipment and wiring that would promote getting Wi-Fi within your building, for instance. Or so you could purchase those things and then you can apply for funding on maintenance of that equipment. And then one of the new opportunities with the modernization order is you can hire a third-party company to do all of the monitoring and maintenance and installing of the equipment for you, so if that's something that you would want. And all of those types of services are Category 2 services. So Category 1, again, is getting connectivity to the building, and that's wide area network services. Category 2 services are getting getting connectivity within the building, and that's local area network services. Again, the discounts on the services, and I'll talk more about this in just a second, is 20 to 90% of the eligible services. The way that we figure out what your discount is to look at your poverty level and then look at your urban or rural status. And so what that means is if you have, let's say, our main method is using the National School Lunch Program, so for education. So even though we fund libraries, we base our poverty on something that's more common in the educational system, which is the National School Lunch Program. If your students within a school qualify for the National School Lunch Program, then that indicates a certain level of poverty. And so what we look at is if you have a certain amount of students, then you are placed within a certain band of the discount system. So just to give you an idea, if 75% of your students or more qualify for the National School Lunch Program, then you're up to a 90% discount. And the 90% discount is the highest. Now, the discount is 90% is the highest on Category 1. For Category 2 services, it's actually 85%. That's the highest, and that's a new development in the program. But most tribal schools and libraries are within the 80 to 90% discount range. In fact, I ran some data recently, and for independent schools and libraries, the average discount is around 88%. So it does depend on, where you're located, but that is the general discount range for tribal schools and libraries. Brian, next slide, please. Okay, so let's take a minute just to talk about the types of schools and libraries that are eligible in the E-rate program. So for schools, all types of schools. So we're looking at K through 12 primarily. In some states, we have what we call a non-traditional education. Non-traditional education is preschool, Head Start, juvenile justice, adult education. These are things that vary by state eligibility. Now, I'm using state eligibility on purpose because even though you may be in a completely sovereign nation, the FCC, when the statutes were written, they deferred to state eligibility. And so you will need to look at what state your tribe is geographically located within, and then think about eligibility from that perspective. So each state has a guide on what they consider to be education, a school within their state. And sometimes pre-K fits into it, or Head Start fits into it, or juvenile justice or adult education will fit into that mold, and other times it will not. But in general, K through 12, it can be public, private, parochial, obviously tribal schools and libraries and school districts. If there is an endowment, it cannot exceed $50 million because if you have that much money, you don't need E-rate. And then, as I mentioned, you must meet the definition of an elementary or secondary school under the state's law, so the state that you're geographically located in. So university, college, anything that is above the 12th grade school level is not going to be eligible. And then pre-K is eligible in some states and not others. And then for libraries, it's all public libraries, most private libraries. They have to have a budget that's separate from a school. So if you have, a library that's part of a school and they are presumably using the same budget, then that library cannot apply separately. It would just be looped into the school's application. And then libraries, again, when I talked about state eligibility for schools, there's also kind of a state requirement for libraries. Each state has a certain amount of funding that they give out to libraries, and it's called Library Services and Technology Act funding. So even if you do not ask for this assistance or receive this assistance, this financial assistance, you would have to be eligible for it so that if you wanted to ask for it, you could. And that's the way to think about it in terms of E-rate eligibility. So schools and libraries must be nonprofit entities. And that's for both schools and libraries. Okay, next slide, Brian. Okay, so I want to take a minute to talk about tribal outreach. You may, if you've been in E-rate or you know a little bit about E-rate, you may know that with the modernization order a couple of years ago, one of the things that was specifically addressed was more tribal outreach. And so how this has manifested over the past couple of years is that USAC has appointed a tribal liaison, and that is me. And I have started developing tribal-specific trainings, workshops. I do one-on-one sessions with applicants who need help. We have a portion of the website that is dedicated to just tribal outreach and information on tribal trainings and monthly calls and things like that. And then speaking of the monthly calls, that's another thing that I do every first Wednesday of the month, unless I'm traveling, is dedicated to having a place where I will talk about what's going on currently in the program, things that you need to be aware of, reminders of upcoming deadlines, and then anybody who's on the call can ask me questions, and everyone can kind of hear each other's questions and maybe piggyback off of each other and hear what other people are doing with their applications. And I try to be sensitive to those who are both advanced and or those who are brand new to the program and just trying to hear what this whole thing is all about. So I have those monthly calls for tribal schools and libraries. And then I have made an effort to attend a certain amount of national and regional events to kind of spread the word and promote increased awareness about the E-rate program and about being able to use me as a resource. The application process can be daunting, and so it helps to have someone who you can call whenever you have an issue or a question. And then I can also, if I have that knowledge offhand, can give you examples of other, successful tribal applicants so you can hear more about what they've done with the program. But basically, we want to show a commitment to make sure that connectivity is happening on tribal lands, and that you're both aware of the program and know how to really succeed in the program. So we want to be able to provide you with the resources that you need to be a successful applicant within the E-rate program, with the overall goal, obviously, of reducing the digital divide and making access to education and connectivity within tribal communities that much more prevalent. Next slide, Brian. Okay. So you'll see at the top this says rural healthcare and E-rate programs. That's because our application processes are somewhat similar. The names of our forms are different, and we have a few different rules, but the overall kind of bare bones of the process is similar. So I'll talk about kind of the whole process here just at a high level. The first step is always going to be to determine eligibility. And when I say eligibility, I mean a couple of things specifically. The first is your school eligible, or is your library eligible? So you want to determine that. The second part of eligibility is determining what are the services in the E-rate program that are eligible. So you want to understand what is it that you can get from us, and what is it that you can't get from us. Like, for instance, the computers you can't get from us, but maybe laying high-speed fiber you could get from us. So you want to be able to figure out that, and then also figure out in that process of eligibility, think about, do you want to apply on your own? Do you want to band together with other libraries in the area or other schools in the area, or a combination of schools and libraries? Do you want to apply as a consortium? But you want to think about your overall eligibility, both including you as an entity, as an applicant, and then the services, the types of services you're looking at getting. And then the second step is requesting services. So once you understand what kind of services you can get, you want to request those services. What that means is now it's time to file your first form, and that form is the Form 470. So on the Form 470, it's kind of like putting out an RFP. You would file this form and say on the form what types of services you're looking for and how much of it you're looking for. So for instance, I'm looking for internet access. I'm looking for instance, 20 megs. That's the speed that I'm looking for. Or I'm looking for, increased Wi-Fi, so I want 5 access points to be installed. So you want to think about what it is that your school or your library needs and then put it on that form. Service providers will look at these forms because they get posted to our website, and then they will contact you and they will give you a bid on the services that you've described and said that you need. They will contact you directly, so via phone or email, and you can ask them questions and you can negotiate pricing. But anyone who sends you a bid, you should fairly consider them. Even if it's someone who you've never heard of, give everybody a fair shot. That's the point of the program, is an open, fair, competitive bidding process. And so you will request the services through that Form 470, and then let the form sit out on the website for at least 28 days. And then moving on to the next step, after the 28-day process is over, there's a specific way we like you to evaluate bids. Basically, we want you to create a matrix, so a spreadsheet basically, where you would say, I've looked at their price. You have to evaluate the price, and that has to be the primary factor, is looking at who's the most cost-effective. And then you want to potentially look at other things, and the other things you look at outside of price are totally up to you. So if you want to consider how local they are, if you want to consider customer service, if you want to consider the fact that you've used them before, you have prior experience with them, or they have good reviews, you've heard good things about them. Any of those types of things or anything else you can think of that's reasonable, you can use to evaluate an incoming bid. And then you select a service provider. And once you select a provider, you'll let them know that they've been selected. You may sign a contract. Not all services require a contract, but that may be something you want to do. So at that point, you would sign a contract, or just let the vendor know they've been chosen. And then you'll file your E-rate application. And so your official request for funding is called a Form 471. And the official name of the form is very long and convoluted, so I won't say it. But basically, it's your Form 471, and it's your application for funding. So on that form, you would let us know what service providers you chose, how much the services are, what services you chose. Did you sign a contract? If so, what are the terms of the contract? Basically, all the details of these services and the service providers that are providing them. And then we will review the application, and sometimes we ask questions, or sometimes we make modifications according to things you may not have realized something wasn't entirely eligible, or something like that. And so once we've decided, then we send a funding notification, and at some point in there, you start your services, and if you start your services before you find out about your funding, you can still ask for reimbursements on the services retroactively going back to the beginning of the funding year. And then you let us know that the service has started, and then the final step is to invoice us. And so when I say invoice, I mean you can ask for reimbursements on items you paid for out of pocket, or you have the option of talking with your service provider ahead of time and asking them to provide the discount directly onto the bill that they send you. That discount we talked about, the 20 to 90%, let's say you're getting your $100 internet bill per month, and then you have a discount of 80%. They would send you a bill for $20 instead of $100. And then it is their responsibility to get their reimbursement from us, but that wouldn't be on you. The other thing you could do is get your $100 bill per month, pay your $100 bill, and then invoice USAC, and we would send you $80. So either way, you're paying $20. The difference is whether or not you want to pay $20 up front or pay the $100 and get a $80 reimbursement. And, you know, we have it's about a 50-50 fallout, where 50% of people prefer, you know, to get a discounted bill, and 50% of people prefer to pay out of pocket and get reimbursed. And that may be for budgeting purposes or some other reason why that preference is made, but it makes no difference to us. The choice is yours. So that's how the process works. You figure out your eligibility, figure out what services you want to ask for, request the services, get incoming bids from service providers, decide on a service provider, request your funding, get a decision on your funding, let us know services have started, and then ask for reimbursements on the services, on the funding, sorry. So that is the whole application process in a nutshell. Brian, you can go to the next slide. And so just closing out here, we just want to remind you that our purpose is to build relationships, strengthen relationships, and ultimately better serve you. You are our stakeholders, and so we care about you. We care about making a better community for you that is more connected and done so in an affordable manner. And so I'm here for you if you have any questions, concerns, complaints, anything like that. You can always reach me. And if you go to the next slide, Brian, you'll see my contact info. Just to remind you, I'm the program analyst. I'm also the tribal liaison for the Schools and Libraries E-Rate program. And there's my email address, and there's my phone number, and it's my direct line. So I'm available anytime to help you successfully get through this process. I hope that this has been a useful presentation, and if you have any questions at this point, I would love to hear them. Again, or comments or concerns, anything like that. We have time for me to answer any and all questions.
All right, thank you, Mackenzie. You know, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, if you'd like to ask a question over the phone line, just use the raise the hand option on your control panel, and I can unmute your line. Or if you would like to type a question into the questions box, that'll also appear on my screen, and I can read it out. And while we're waiting for you know, people to ask any questions they may have, I did have one question for you, Mackenzie, in relation to the eligibility of tribal libraries to access E-rate funding.
Yes.
I know that in the past we have heard some issues from tribes that because of the Library Services and Technology Act, they haven't been able to actually get certification from their respective states to qualify or constitute what is a library on their tribal lands. Is there any kind of method in terms of working with USAC or perhaps with the FCC to grant forbearance on the rules to get those structures identified as libraries?
There's not a structure in place right now, but that is something that is a project, kind of a longer term project for me. If you find that you have difficulty with getting eligibility, please contact me, because I'm collecting these as kind of like a case to take to A, the FCC, but B, also hoping to take this to the, there's an organization of state librarians, COSLA, and I'm hoping to be able to kind of liaise with them a bit and figure out a workaround that's something sustainable for tribal libraries within all the states, so that this isn't, something that individual libraries have to deal with. But yes, this is something that is on my radar, and I am, trying to come up with ways to make this a sustainable workaround. So if you do have issues, please reach out to me so that I can understand what the specific issue is, and if I can reach out to your state librarian individually or your state E-rate coordinator, or if this is a larger issue that I'll have to take to the FCC.
Okay, great, thank you. We did get a question from the audience kind of along the same lines. GAO has pointed out that the problems of state libraries not wanting to certify certain tribal libraries because of sovereignty issues. Question was, do you have any data on how many tribal libraries participate in the E-rate program?
Off the top of my head, no. But if you email me, I can run some data and get back to you on that.
Okay, great. And that would be for funding year 2015 would be the latest, right?
Actually, by now that the library's deadline has passed, we could run it for 2015 or 2016.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
We'll just give a minute or two for anyone else to ask a question.
Sure.
And while we're doing that, I'll go ahead and ask another follow-up question.
Sure, yeah.
So I know that earlier you had mentioned, the differences between Category 1 and Category 2 funding. Mm-hmm. I know that in the last modernization order, a lot of focus was kind of placed on funding for Wi-Fi capabilities, and I'm assuming that would fall under, of course, Category 2.
It depends on what the capability is. I mean, in order to get Wi-Fi, you have to have a solid internet access coming to the building in the first place, and so because of that, the fiber eligibility of fiber was actually expanded in Category 1 also, and so you can purchase dark fiber, and it has the same kind of eligibility limitations of lit fiber now, but it may prove to be more affordable, and you can have that fiber installed, so the construction and everything is all included under Category 1 services, and so that falls under Category 1. And then for Category 2, the things that were added were managed Wi-Fi, which is also, the managed Wi-Fi is kind of like the understandable term, but the E-rate term is technically managed managed internal broadband services, MIBS for short. So under managed internal broadband services, that's what I briefly referenced earlier when I was saying you could hire a third-party company to come in and monitor your equipment and your Wi-Fi, and they can install things for you and help you with figuring out potentially the networking layout. If you want to get something actually fixed and replaced, that still counts as a maintenance subcategory, but the actual managed internal broadband services is a whole kind of subcategory of service now. And that is basically hiring someone to hire, a company to manage your Wi-Fi for you. So yeah, you have the Category 1 aspect of getting higher speeds to the building, and then the managed Wi-Fi of getting a company to actually manage your Wi-Fi for you. So yeah, there is, in both categories, there are now broader capabilities to be able to promote that Wi-Fi network, yes.
Great. And in terms of, I know you had just mentioned dark fiber, is there an actual kind of maybe clearinghouse or registry where that information is actually available? I know that in the past we've heard from tribes, wanting to get more information on actual dark fiber in or around their reservation lands. Is that something that USAC would be able, or maybe in the future, looking to be able to help assist with?
Are you talking about dark fiber that's maybe already in the ground, or
Right.
just like people who are selling dark fiber?
Already in the ground. I guess both. Already in
in
the ground and people that are selling it.
Okay. In terms of people who are selling it, no, we don't have that information. In terms of whether it's in the ground, well, obviously some of it's in the ground. In terms of where it is, that would be a question for the FCC. I'm not sure that they have it, but if someone has it, it's going to be them. And if they do have it, it may not necessarily be reliable. But that would be a question for the FCC, so I can follow up on that, Brian, and let you know.
Okay, great.
So basically like a dark fiber map, potentially?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. We have one more question here.
Okay.
Have any changes been made to USAC forms to better track tribal participation? I believe that was part of the latest order.
We have a box. The way that it used to be captured on forms, and now with the addition of our new applicant portal called EPIC, EPC, EPIC is how you kind of interact with the program, so to speak. So when you file forms, when you create customer service questions, when you make requests, a lot of it is in EPIC now, almost all of it. And so in EPIC, again, that's EPC, it's the E-Rate Productivity Center, so we call it EPIC for short. Within EPIC, every entity has a profile, and on the profile, basic information is captured like name, contact information, address, mailing address, whether you're urban or rural, if you're a library, you know, what your square footage is, that's used to calculate your Category 2 funding. One of the boxes where you indicate, I'm a school, what kind of school am I? I am a public school, I'm a private school, I'm a charter school. One of those boxes now says tribal. So right there in your profile, if you check the box, and that's the main thing, is you have to make sure that you're checking the box, then we will be able to run data to figure out what tribal schools are doing, what tribal libraries are doing, if there are tribal school districts or library systems. Going forward, running data will be a lot easier. We also have gone a step further, and in addition to the tribal box, we also have a box specifically for BIE schools, so that if you are a BIE operated school, you would want to check that box, and then we would be able to run specific data on that subset of BIE schools as well as all tribal schools. So, so yes, we have worked on that, and as long as those boxes are appropriately checked, the data going forward will be a lot better and easier to run.
All right, thank you. We do have a question over the phone from Miss Beverly Lewis. I've unmuted your line.
Yes,
okay.
I had a question. Will you be able to work with the schools here on our reservation as far as some of the filings that they the past, like for example last year's what they sent to USAC in applying for the services, and when they get reimbursed, they're not reimbursed for some of the filings that they've made, and just kind of explain to them what reason they didn't get reimbursed for it?
I'm happy to do that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, because we are a provider, and all we get is the paperwork that they've applied for the different types of services.
Gotcha.
it got approved and reimbursed, but it's only like for one service that they got discounted for.
So just to give you an idea, this is without knowing anything about them, a couple of things could have happened. They asked for something that wasn't eligible. They had, depending on whether they may have had someone had a question about their application. If they didn't respond in a timely manner, then their reviewer would have modified the request and then only funded them partially because they didn't know the answer to the question. And then the other main thing is if they forgot to file a form, like if they forgot to file the form certifying that their services had actually started, then when they went to invoice, their invoice may have been reduced by a bit. So those are some of the main things that typically happen. But if you tell them to reach out to me, or if you reach out to me and give me their information, I can look into it and find out what the actual specific reason was and make sure that they understand, or help them, prevent that from happening in the future, hopefully.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to get all of them involved. Currently, we have 4 schools here on our reservation.
Okay.
And every year, at least 1 or 2 of them will apply, and the rest won't. So I'm kind of like trying to push them to apply for the services.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. For the schools that do, maybe what you can suggest is that all 4 schools form a consortium. Because if you have someone that's willing, you obviously have someone there out of the 4 schools that's willing to apply, to file the paperwork, and all they would have to do is just include the other schools on the application.
Okay.
So maybe that would be something they'd be willing to consider. I'm assuming that the problem is that they just maybe don't have time for it, or they don't understand it. And so if they can kind of piggyback off schools that are already understanding it, at least to a certain point, and finding time to apply, that might eliminate that obstacle for them.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, thank you. I'm not seeing any additional questions at this time, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up for today.
Okay.
Thank you, Kenzie, for doing this presentation. And like I had mentioned, this webinar is being recorded, so we will be sure to post it on NCAI's website as well as our YouTube page, and share it broadly with our membership. Mackenzie, did you have any last words you wanted to say?
Just thank you very much for taking the time out of your day for E-Rate, and hopefully this was helpful.
All right, thanks everyone for joining, and I'll be sending out a follow-up email after this, and have a great day.
Thanks, Brian. You too.